Stephen Douglas of Illinois introduced a fateful piece of legislation in Congress. Douglas had no intention of opening up another painful debate on slavery. He simply wanted to see a railroad built from his state across the Great Plains to California. And he thought this was more likely to happen if Congress organized the plains as Nebraska Territory and opened the area to settlers. Because this territory lay north of the Missouri Compromise line, Douglas's original bill said nothing about slavery. Southerners in Congress agreed to support Douglas as long as his bill included a few changes. The final bill created two new territories, Kansas and Nebraska. It also scrapped the Missouri Compromise by opening both territories to slavery. It was left up to the people settled in Kansas and Nebraska to decide what to do about slavery. Douglas called this policy popular sovereignty, or rule by the people. Abolitionists denounced it as
a gross violation of a sacred pledge, as part and parcel of a pernicious plot.
The Kansas-Nebraska Act hit the North like a thunderbolt. Once again, Northerners were haunted by nightmare visions of slavery marching across the plains. Douglas tried to calm their fears by saying Kansas and Nebraska were not suited to slave labor. Nebraska, perhaps. But when Northerners looked at Kansas on a map, like the one you see here, they were not so sure. As newspaper editor Horace Greeley charged in the New York Tribune,
the pretense of Douglas and company that not even Kansas is to be made a slave state by his bill is a gag of the first water. Ask any Missourian what he thinks about it. The Kansas Territory is bounded in its entire length by Missouri, with a whole tier of slave counties leaning against it. Won't be a slave state. Gentlemen, don't lie anymore.
After the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed, settlers poured into Kansas. Most were farmers who had heard the soil was good on the plains. But others came for just one purpose, to make Kansas either slave or free. In the North, abolitionists supplied money and weapons to anti-slavery settlers. In the South, towns took up collections to send their young men to Kansas to support Southern rights. As a result, Kansas soon had two competing governments, one supporting slavery and one opposing it. On May 21, 1856, an army of 800 pro-slavery settlers invaded Lawrence, Kansas, the home of the anti-slavery government. The invaders burned a hotel, looted several homes, and tossed the presses of two abolitionist newspapers into the Kaw River. As the pro-slavery settlers left Lawrence, one of them boasted,
"Gentlemen, this is the happiest day of my life."
Revenge was swift. 3 days later, a fanatic abolitionist named John Brown gathered up 6 followers and headed for the pro-slavery town of Pottawatomie. Brown estimated that 5 anti-slavery men had died in the Lawrence raid. Upon reaching Pottawatomie, he had his men hack 5 pro-slavery men to death with their sabers. For Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts, the growing violence in Kansas was proof of what he had long suspected, that Senator Stephen Douglas had conspired with the Southerners in Congress to make Kansas a slave state. In 1856, Sumner voiced his suspicions in a passionate speech titled "The Crime Against Kansas." Sumner's language was angry and harsh. Douglas, he said, was
a noisome, squat, and nameless animal.
Sumner also attacked Senator Andrew Pickens of South Carolina. Pickens, he charged, had
chosen a mistress, who, though ugly to others, is always lovely to him. I mean the harlot Slavery.
White Southerners were enraged by this insult, none more so than Pickens' nephew, Representative Preston Brooks. The next day, Brooks confronted Sumner in the Senate, saying,
"I have read your speech twice over. It is a libel on South Carolina and on Mr. Butler."
With these words, Brooks began thrashing Sumner with his cane. By the time the other senators could pull Brooks away, Sumner was dazed and bleeding. The picture you see here reflects a northern view of this event. If you look carefully, you can see Southerners holding back Sumner's friends while they enjoy the sight of the Massachusetts senator being beaten. Reactions to the attack on Sumner showed how badly divided the country had become. Many Southerners applauded Brooks. He had defended the honor of his family and of his state. From all over the South, Brooks received gifts of new canes to replace the one he had broken on Sumner's head. Most Northerners viewed the beating as yet another example of Southern brutality. Brooks, in their eyes, was no better than the pro-slavery bullies who had attacked the good people of Lawrence, Kansas. This violent incident revealed something else as well. It showed that some people were no longer content just to argue about slavery. This was true of a Connecticut schoolgirl who wrote to Sumner saying, "I don't think it is very much use to stay any longer in the high school. The boys would be better learning to hold muskets, and the girls to make bullets."